The holidays are approaching, and of course, for most of us, Thanksgiving is a major celebration. I recently shared a Thanksgiving decoration project featuring pumpkins, but this week I thought it would be fun to make this turkey protester. The design is by Steve Good, and I'll leave a link to the free pattern in the description. It looks deceptively simple, but the lettering contains some challenges. I chuckled when I saw this pattern on Steve Good's website, and I'll leave a link in the description so you can download the free pattern and make one of these yourself. Steve suggested 1/4-inch stock, but I wanted to make it a bit more substantial, so I made the two parts from 1/2-inch poplar. I'm using a number 5 Pegas Modified Geometry blade since poplar is relatively soft, and I'll be making a lot of sharp turns with the lettering on the turkey's protest sign. If you're new to scroll sawing and want to learn more about how I choose the correct size blade for each project, I'll leave a link to my video on that subject on the screen and in the description. Depending on what type of scroll saw projects you intend to make, you may find that cutting letters is a useful skill to achieve. I've developed some tips and techniques on cutting letters that I'll share with you as I make this project. My first tip is to cut on the inside of the lines whenever you're cutting letters. The reason for this is twofold. First, letters are usually spaced close together, and if you cut on the outside of the line, you may find the letters running into one another. Cutting on the line reduces this risk, and cutting on the inside minimizes this hazard. Second, for the letters like the G, there are places where the internal parts of the letter are such that the wood is weakened and could break if too much material is removed. Be sure to watch until the end, and you'll see what I mean. Often when lettering is part of a pattern, a stencil font is used. This prevents the center from falling out of letters like the O I just cut. This is one of the places where I need to cut carefully just inside the line, and then handle the workpiece carefully so I don't break out that center. The T is made with only one cut, and on this letter, plus the E that follows it, the skill you need next is how to make sharp 90-degree corners. I'll show and tell you how I make them. I cut from the pilot hole to the nearest corner, then backed the blade up slightly, just enough so it wasn't cutting. Next, I used the newly created kerf, along with a bit of the waist area, to rotate the workpiece to the desired cutting direction, and then I gently pushed it into the blade again. The letter T is made by cutting a series of 90-degree corners connected by straight lines. The letter E is cut in a similar manner. It's a series of 90-degree corners connected by straight lines. If you're new to scroll sawing, you may want to practice cutting letters on scrap wood before you commit to an actual project. I've ruined projects with a cutting error, and I still do, despite hundreds of hours cutting on scroll saws. Sometimes mistakes are not noticeable and you can ignore them, but other times you cannot. Your work, like mine, is not likely to be perfect very often, if ever. Learn from your mistakes so the next project will be better. It took me more than half an hour to cut the letters for the sign, and there was no point in my blathering on for that length of time as I cut letter after letter after letter after letter. Oh, excuse me. I got hypnotized by seeing the same procedure repeated over and over and over, and, well, you get the idea. I've come to what proved to be the most difficult part of the project, and that is cutting the letter G. I have been using a number 5 blade at about full speed, so I decided to slow it down for the intricate maneuvers I would be making while I cut the letter G. I zoomed in so you could see a little better. I was a little nervous about this cut anyway, since I recently had a problem cutting a G on another project. To make matters worse, for some reason, the pattern came loose in the area where I was cutting, and it was flapping around a bit. I tried holding it down with a finger, but that was getting that digit too close to the blade for me not to be nervous about it. I finally gave up, took the workpiece over to the workbench, pulled a small piece of the pattern away from that area, used a pencil to draw the cut lines, and then returned the workpiece to the scroll saw. I threaded the blade through the pilot hole once more, and I followed the line I drew to complete the cut. The result was not too good. It was somewhere between disappointing and total crap. I was tempted to toss the whole piece, but then I reasoned that a turkey probably wouldn't make a very professional-looking protest sign anyway, so I should at least finish cutting, evaluate the whole project, and then decide. I hate to waste time and materials. One reason for making the interior cuts first is illustrated by what happened here. If a cut or cuts is really off, you can cut your losses and start over. But I have a lot of time invested in this project already, so I'm not ready to toss what I've done. So, with tears in my eyes, I continued cutting the letters. This, of course, brought me to the second letter G in the word Thanksgiving. I wasn't going to let the previous failure stop me. The pattern fluttered again, making the difficult cut even more demanding. I did what I could, but the second G did not turn out well either. Still, I'll complete the remaining interior cuts and make my final judgment after the pattern is removed. There are a few interior cuts left, not difficult compared to the letters I just cut. The cutouts for the eyes are very close together, so I'm making these cuts on the inside of the lines to keep the gap between them at a safe size. The cut on the turkey's hand provides some detail to an area that would otherwise turn into a big blob. The space is narrow and there are several points at the turns, so it requires a bit of skill to cut. I found that when I cut to the end of the line, I could back up slightly into the curve the blade had just created, and I used the curve and the waist area to turn the workpiece to align the blade for the next cut. Now I'm ready for the outside cut. The top is a good place to start since it's close to the edge. I didn't have to go far to arrive at the first corner. Once I reached the intersection, I backed the workpiece up slightly, just enough that it was no longer cutting. That removed the tension on the blade, and I was able to turn the workpiece 90 degrees by using a combination of the kerf and the waist area. The blade only has to nibble away a small amount of wood in this maneuver. Once the board is facing in the direction I want to go next, I add pressure and start cutting again. The sign's outside corners are all rounded, so they're quite easy to make. Once I arrived at the spot where the stick holding the poster is attached, there's another 90-degree turn. I made that turn in the same manner as the previous sharp turn. This is a maneuver you'll find yourself making continually with scroll sawing, so it's a good idea to learn and perfect this technique. The rest of the exterior cut is simply a combination of curves, straight lines, and 90-degree turns. I didn't see any problem areas that needed to be addressed. This long cut is summarized by words you've possibly heard me use many times before. Take your time and let the blade do the work. There's one small part left to cut on this board, and that's the turkey's wing. I realized I called the other wing holding the sign a hand, but my mind went blank and I couldn't think of the proper word. I cut along the first line to a place that required an impossibly tight turn. So I used a little trick. I backed the blade out of that spot using the saw blade curve just created. Then I was able to use the kerf plus a tiny bit of waist area to turn the workpiece 180 degrees and back the blade to the place where I'd stopped cutting. Only a small directional change was now needed to start cutting in the next direction I had to go. I needed to perform that maneuver one more time, but the rest of the cut for the wing was merely a matter of following a simple curve. The turkey attaches to the stand via a slot and tab construction. I used to avoid this method as a pain in the neck, or maybe even a lower opinion if you catch my drift, but it does provide a much stronger attachment than a butt joint. The key is to ensure the slot is the right length and width. The turkey is a little more than 1/2 inch thick, so I resized the width lines for the slot accordingly. In addition to the slot being the correct width and length for the tab, you want crisp 90-degree corners on both the slot and the tab. If these cuts are sloppy, you'll have a poor-looking fit. I cut the slot from the pilot hole to the nearest corner. Once I reached that spot, I backed up the workpiece slightly, just enough so it wasn't cutting. I was then able to use the soft curve plus a little bit of the waist area to anchor the blade as I swiveled the workpiece 90 degrees to line it up for the cut along one of the slot's edges. I repeated the process for each corner. Now I can make the exterior cut for the oval base. Cutting ovals isn't difficult, but you need to follow the line carefully. It's also best to keep the workpiece moving to avoid leaving flat spots. I made a test fit of the turkey's tab into the base's slot and found it just a tad too narrow. That's okay because it's an easy fix. If the slot was too wide, the fit would be sloppy and not easy to fix. The assembly was easy. Just glue on the wing and attach the turkey to the base by adding some glue to the tab and inserting it into the base. I'm not sure if I forgot to record this step or if the file was lost during some recent computer problems. Once the glue was dry, I completed the project with several coats of spray polyurethane. Despite the cutting problems on the two G's, I decided to keep this poor little turkey. I still find him amusing, and I hope you do as well. As always, I welcome your comments and reply to each one. Until next time, 2 suggestions for what to watch next after this video are on the screen now.